Welcome back. Today we're going to begin our study on the Romantic Era. Be sure you read in your book on page 251 through 270. So we'll start with the Romantic Era and then we'll move on into Schubert and the art song. On pages 253 through 256, you will read information about Romanticism and the Romantic Era, which lasted between 1820 and 1900. To help put things into context, the Houses of Parliament in London were built during the Romantic Era. Another famous structure of the Romantic Era, right in the middle of downtown New York City, is the Trinity Church. And this is a picture of the outside and inside of this church. It was also a focus of during the movie National Treasure, where they went into all these catacombs underneath the church, and we're finding all these labyrinth of places to go and find national treasure. So as you can see, all the skyscrapers around it, they've built all these skyscrapers all around this church. But right there in the center is this cozy little Romantic Era church, which is just beautiful. The grand piano finishes its evolution and becomes the instrument that we still hear today. As you can see inside on the left picture, there is this huge metal frame that is in place to hold and keep the structure secure, as it has all this pressure on it, like thousands of pounds of pressure with all the tight strings that are pulled across the top of it. And the action inside the piano, there's a little felt hammer that goes up and hits the string, and so that action is finalized, and it's still the same action that we use today in grand pianos. And the piano became a very important instrument during the Romantic Era, not only as an accompaniment instrument for the singers and soloists, that especially in the art song, but also in its own right. The piano music just blossomed during the Romantic Era, and there is just a lot of it. On pages 257 through 262, you will read about Romanticism in music. Here are the important things that you need to know. Number one, during the Romantic Era, there's an emphasis on self-expression and individuality of style. They don't want their music to sound like everyone else's music. Nationalism was expressed by using folk songs, dances, legends, and history of their homelands. Again, they didn't want all the music to sound like it came from Vienna or Venice or Germany. They wanted it to sound like their own countries. Composers drew on Asian and Arabian musical styles. So transportation was more easily accessible, and composers could go and visit different countries, and they could have other people coming into where they were living from other countries, and they would hear the influences of music from all around the world, and they wanted to incorporate that into their music. Program music was instrumental music that was associated with a story, poem, or nature scene. So they did not have a text or a libretto that was going on. There were no words being sung or said, but the music told a story. Similar to Vivaldi when he would have the story of spring or winter or autumn. Now program music is telling a whole story through just the music, or it could be, again, creating a picture without the canvas. Orchestras are larger with close to 100 musicians, and they are using all the modern brass, woodwind, percussion, and string instruments. So the orchestras are huge, and all the instruments are now in their state that we still use them today. As I mentioned earlier, the piano is the favorite instrument of the Romantic Era. The abilities of the piano have really grown, and it has such great dynamic abilities. You can have the ability to play very soft and very loud with crescendos and diminuendos, and it's such an expressive instrument. You don't have to have other instruments to play with it in order to have all the harmonies, and so it's kind of self-contained. It is very And it's more portable than, say, an organ, because an organ, once you put it into a facility, it is pretty well stuck there. You can't move the pipes around. So the piano really becomes very popular. Dynamic ranges are all expanded to fortissimo and pianissimo, with crescendos and diminuendos used more frequently. So you will hear a larger dynamic contrast. Pitch ranges are also more extreme. They're really pushing the limits of the instruments and of singers, so that you really have super high pitches and super low pitches. They're wanting to expand all of the different ranges of pitches. And compositions become shorter. They can be 1 minute long, and they also become longer. They could be several hours long. And so you have the little miniatures and those that you're going to be going and staying for the entire evening. And so quite a range of time frames in the music. On page 260, you begin to read about how the composer is affected by changes that are happening in the Romantic era. First of all, the tiny princely states are abolished, and because of the wars in Europe, aristocrats can no longer afford their private opera houses and orchestras. And the Industrial Revolution increases the prosperity of the middle class. As a result, the composers wrote primarily for middle-class audiences. They're no longer writing for the nobility and the aristocracy. That's not where the new money is. That's not where the money is that people want to spend. The money is with the middle class. Public concerts grew in popularity. Everyone wants to have entertainment now. They have money to be able to do these things. Most large cities founded orchestras with regular subscription concerts. And that still continues today. The Memphis Symphony has a subscription concert series that you can just sign up and buy season tickets, and you'll have tickets for the whole year. Music conservatories were founded in Europe and in the United States. So that's where you have colleges that focus just on music, and you can get your degree in performance and in music, and that's mostly what all you're going to study. You're not going to have to be studying English and history and math. It's a music conservatory where you just study music. Composers also taught music lessons and became conductors for these public institutions. And so a lot of the composers now are going to be university professors, where they are teaching classes and teaching composition and teaching how to play musical instruments. And they are also working in the opera houses and in the concert halls. And so the composers are doing many things besides just composing. Others also become touring virtuosos and music critics. And so transportation is easier to come by now and less expensive, so they can travel more widely and more safely and do some performing. And there's also now people are buying magazines that have critics, comments by critics about the music, and they can read, oh, what's the good thing to go hear this week? Which opera should I go see? Which composer is writing new things? Who should we go hear this weekend with our money that we have available for entertainment? And so the critics were playing a big role in who went to go and see what. On page 263, you will read about the art song. This is a new form of music that's invented during the Romantic era. It's a composition for solo voice and piano. They were written to be sung and enjoyed at home. Again, you didn't have to leave the home to go and hear a concert. Now we have these art songs that you can just sing and enjoy while you're at home, and the amateur musician can learn how to sing and play these art songs. Schubert is one of the earliest composers of the art song, and we're going to learn about him now. On page 263 through 264, you'll read about Franz Schubert. This is a picture of Franz Schubert, and he lived between 1797 and 1828. You'll notice that this overlaps some with Beethoven, and Beethoven was considered a classical composer, but Beethoven lived longer. he wrote more music during the classical era and then kind of ushered in the Romantic era, whereas Schubert wrote most of his music during the Romantic era, and he did not live as long. A trendy word that you would have heard being used during the Romantic era, especially if you lived in Vienna, Austria, would have been a Schubert aid. And that meant that you were going to a concert in which Schubert would be there playing the piano, and there would be people all dressed up for the occasion, and it was would it be at a nice home of a wealthy person, and you could go to this home and listen to Schubert play the piano. And those were called Schubert aids. This is a picture painted of one of those Schubert aids, and you will see Schubert there in the center at the piano looking back at the audience, and there's these beautiful women all dressed up and the men are all dressed up, and he's probably taking requests. What would you like to hear next? And so just lots of fun and very popular during the early Romantic era. Schubert was born in Vienna in 1797. Now this is around the same time that Beethoven settled in Vienna. And so both of these composers were living and composing and performing in Vienna at the same time. Now Beethoven had this huge personality and was very extroverted, and everyone was like the paparazzi following Beethoven around because he was just so eccentric. Whereas Schubert was much more introspective into himself, much more shy. He didn't like the big crowds. And so, although he was a fantastic composer, he did not have this huge personality, and so he was overshadowed a lot by Beethoven. Schubert's father was a school teacher, and when Schubert was 11, he became a choir boy. He played the violin, sometimes conducted the orchestra at an exclusive boarding school. And so he was just a quiet boy who enjoyed his music. His first job as a late teen was teaching at his father's school, but he actually hated teaching school. So when he was 17, he began to compose art songs, and by the time he was 19, he had composed 143 songs, 2 symphonies, an opera, and a mass. By the time he was 21, he gave up school teaching altogether and devoted his life to composition. Now, he was still not the big and bold personality that was able to get a lot of jobs, and so he was not making a lot of money with his music. And so he often lived with friends and played for their parties because he didn't have enough money for rent. So in other words, he would just go and live with such and so for a little while and play for all their parties, and they'd finally go, you know, you've lived here long enough. So he would find someone else who wanted music for their parties, and he would go and live with them for a while. And so he just kind of lived with different people and never really had a place of his own because he couldn't afford the rent. But his music was so popular, he usually had a place to stay. As I said before, though, even though his music was very popular, he did not like large crowds. He did not like teaching. And so as a result, his poverty eventually led to poor health, and he died at the age of 31, possibly from typhoid fever. So kind of a sad story because he had such great music, but because of his introverted personality, he was not able to maximize those abilities, and he was never able to make much money at it. One of my favorite pieces by Schubert is Gretchen at the Spinning Wheel. It's a song about a woman who is working at the spinning wheel, making thread to use to make clothing with. And it is a song she is singing about her lover whom she misses. And I love this piece because as a singer and as a piano player, the voice part is telling a great story, and the piano part actually has its own character. The piano is the spinning wheel, and you'll hear it do 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 do. It's the spinning wheel going around and around and around, and you'll hear the spinning wheel speed up or slow down, and that is so the piano has its own character that it's playing, and then there's a great storyline. So here's what the text interprets to be, that translates into. My peace is gone, my heart is heavy. I will find it never and never more. Where I do not have him, that is the grave. The whole world is bitter to me. My poor head is crazy in me. My poor mind is torn apart. For him only I look out the window. Only for him do I go out of the house. His tall walk, his noble figure, his mouth's smile, his eyes' power, and his mouth's magic flow, his hand clasp, and his kiss. My peace is gone, my heart is heavy. I will find it never and never more. My bosom urges itself towards him. Might I grasp and hold him, and kiss him, and, as I would wish, at his kisses I should die. And so it's just this girl's story of missing her lover and singing about him as she spins her thread. So click on the YouTube link so you can listen to this song. Not only did Schubert write great voice music and great art songs, but he also wrote a lot of great symphonies. If you look on page 265, you'll see a little paragraph about his symphonies. And the most famous one he wrote is actually his Unfinished Symphony. No one really knows why it only has 2 movements, but it is one of the only 2-movement symphonies ever written. It is his most popular orchestral work and was written 6 years before his death. And again, we probably will never know why it was only 2 movements long rather than the usual 4. And this symphony was discovered 10 years after Schubert's death by Robert Schumann, and we will study him a little bit later. So even though there's not a listening guide for this, I have included a link for this symphony. It's just a great symphony to listen to. It lasts about 30 minutes, so I hope you'll enjoy listening to some or all of it. All right, back to the pieces that are in the textbook. If you look on page 265, you'll read about the Earl King. And it's a musical setting of a narrative ballad of the supernatural. And the text was actually written by Goethe. It's spelled Goethe, but it's pronounced Goethe. And he was a very famous poet during this time that lots of people liked to put music to his texts. On page 266 to 267, you will see the translation of this story. Again, one of the reasons I really love this piece is because the piano is its own character. The piano is the horse running and going fast and trying to get the father home because his child is dying. And so he's trying to, the horse is trying to run as fast as possible to get the father home. One of the interesting things about this piece also is that the singer has to use a variety of voices in this song because he is all these characters. He is the narrator, he's the father, he's the son, he's the Earl King. And so you'll hear in this recording that the singer changes his voice so that it sounds like a different character. So here is the translation that you will hear as you hear this song. The narrator says, "Who rides so late through the night and the wind? It is the father with his child. He holds the boy close in his arms. He clasps him securely. He holds him warmly." And the father says, "My son, why do you hide your face so anxiously?" The son says, "Father, don't you see the Earl King? The Earl King with his crown and his train?" And the father says, "My son, it is a streak of mist." Then the Earl King says, "Dear child, come go with me. I'll play the prettiest games with you. Many colored flowers will grow along the shore. My mother has many golden garments." And the son says, my father, and don't you hear the Earl King whispering promises to me?" The father says, "Be quiet. Stay quiet, my child. The wind is rustling in the dead leaves." Then the Earl King says, "My handsome boy, will you come with me? My daughters shall wait upon you. My daughters, lead off the dance every night, and cradle and dance, and sing you to sleep." The son says, my father, and don't you see there the Earl King's daughters in the shadows?" The father says, my son, I see it clearly. The old willows look so gray." The Earl King says, "I love you. Your beautiful figure delights me, and if you are not willing, then I shall use force." And the son says, my father, now he is taking hold of me. The Earl King has hurt me." The narrator ends. The father shudders. He rides swiftly on. He holds in his arms the groaning child. He reaches the courtyard weary and anxious. In his arms, the child was dead. And so the father is trying to soothe the child and say, it's going to be okay. We're going to make it. It's going to be okay. But death, who is the Earl King, is coming to take the son away. So I hope you enjoy listening to this. The final piece that we're going to listen to by Schubert is the Trout Quintet. You can read about it on page 269, and then the listening guide is on page 270. It is a piano quintet, which I love because I play the piano and the violin and the cello, a little bit of viola, and even less bass, but it includes all of those instruments. And I think it's just really cool to have all those instruments playing together. The piano is not an accompaniment part. It's actually part of the quintet. It is a major part of the ensemble and not just accompanying the ensemble. So this is a theme and a variations. So you'll hear the theme. Variation 1 is about a minute in. Variation 2 is about 2 minutes in. Then you have variation 3, variation 4, 5, and then 6. And so just a very famous piece that is a nice piano quintet. I love the way Schubert told a story through his music, and his songs were always so interesting, and the melodies were just fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed listening to the music by Schubert.